Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I am Nita, your host for this edition of the Sunday Roundtable. This week we have Anthony Hilton, MP for Western St. Andrew, the PNP representative for that area, and along with Tony Hilton, we have the usual suspects: Brother Patrick McCarthy, Will Rattigan, Herb Nelson, and Las Crawford. Brethren, last week we look at Golden's speech before the People's National Party 85th Congress, and we sort of dissect it. We asked a lot of questions, and some of the questions we didn't get any answers because Mark, I'm not a member of the PNP, so I couldn't give you the information you want. And we agreed that we'd reach out to Mr. Hilton and let him talk with us. The topic before us is the PNP. Is it the same old song or a new direction? Mr. Hilton, your party had a successful conference, I would say, based on the feedback. But some of us think that nothing changed. I, for one, said to my brethren last week that golden speech sounded like something I heard before. Nothing new. Of course, I credit him with raising the issue of the recall, the mechanism. But the dominant sentiment from the discussion last week is how all of what he's suggesting gonna be paid for. And that's a critical question the Jamaican people been asking. How all of that going to be paid for? I must say, John now join us.
Sorry about,
Yes,
why I'm
Brother
late,
John, welcome. So the question, yes, I know. Let's, the question in Hilton is the PNP the same PNP or a new direction? And to discuss that, we're also going to include some phone call from our listeners because currently we have 41 listeners online, and sometimes that figure move up to 300, 400, and we want to invite the audience to ask you some questions and hear from you. Is the PNP different or is it the same old PNP? I'm sure my colleagues have questions that they want to ask, but how about start with that question? PNP, same
but we can't
or
see him,
different?
we can see Mr. Hilton, or is only me can't see him?
No,
No,
he's,
there's
he's
some
having
problem he's having, John.
problem.
We have
Oh.
some tech issues. We have some tech issues, John.
Yeah.
Oh,
Let me
John, can you
start.
sit back so we can see?
Yeah.
Yes, John.
Yeah. Let me
Okay,
start
Mr. Go
first.
ahead.
Yeah. Let me start first by saying the PNP is the same in respect of its philosophy and its ideology. Its philosophy is rooted in its constitution and its approach. So it's not a different party in the sense that it's a new party that was formed. What we're talking about in terms of new directions are new policy prescriptions. And in that sense, what the party leader outlined at the conference was some directions in which the PNP intends to govern and to take the country should it be elected, should it come to office in the next general elections. And as you've said, you have dissected the speech last week, and therefore on this platform are very familiar with the prescriptions, at least some of them, because in a limited time frame, these are simply some priorities that he chose to focus on. But the menu of ideas and policy approaches are rich, and we believe are different from what the current administration is pursuing in some important respects. So, for example, I mean, it is very clear that what this administration is pursuing is not just fiscal responsibility, because the PNP, in the last administration of which I was a part, we put in place a fiscal policy framework. We enshrine it in law, and therefore ensure that what we're working with is not simply um, a set of policy ideas that can be easily changed. These were inscribed in law. And therefore, it's not just the issue. You start from the premise that both parties understand the importance of fiscal responsibility. So that shouldn't be at issue. The issue is whether there's a sufficiency of planning and policy ideas that could ensure that having maintained macro stability, that we can move on from there to ensure sustained growth in the economy with employment and with real wages or livable wages among the people. That, we believe, is a big issue. And this administration has chosen to focus on debt reduction at a time when we have established a trajectory in our debt reduction strategy. That has been going well. The administration has chosen to enhance that and to focus on speeding up the debt reduction at the expense of some other critical program, particularly in the social arena, that we believe is critical if you're going to not only balance the books but balance people's lives in a way that you have social cohesion in the society. So I think what you would have heard from the party leader's speech addresses those issues and the ideas for policy prescriptions that the PNP is currently pursuing. That
Gentlemen, Mr. Hilton, are you guys hearing me?
Yes.
yes,
Yeah,
I'm hearing.
you break up a little, but you hear you.
So that's my opening statement, Michael.
Yeah, I hear you, Mikey.
You say, Hilton, if you may, can you expand a little more on that
Not seeing you, Mikey.
debt reduction issue?
Yeah, when you said expand a little more, I mean the debt reduction.
In terms of the main difference that the PNP would bring as against what the current administration is doing, because you mentioned that it's something the PNP had already outlined from the previous administration, and this administration took it a step further and emphasized on the debt reduction at the expense of other programs. Now,
Yeah.
I'm asking, can you expand a little more in terms of what the PNP would be doing differently,
Well, I mean,
while at the same time addressing the debt reduction?
yeah. Well, as I've said, a debt trajectory, a debt reduction strategy was in place and agreed. Came to the parliament and was blessed and agreed, and both sides agreed that there's a need. Debt reduction is important. That we'll follow a certain pathway that have us reducing our debt up to around about 60 percent of GDP in or around 2026. Now, that timeline was thrown off during the COVID period, and I think that was addressed and said that should be achieved around 2028. Instead, I think it was expanded about 2 years to get to that stage at that timeline. Instead, the government has, even post-COVID, has continued on a trajectory where it is paying down, even at a much faster rate, that debt reduction. At a time when coming out of COVID and the dislocations of COVID were quite clear and apparent to everybody, that there are all kinds of dislocation, and there was the need to address some of the social concerns. And of course, you have the whole issue of the inflation that arose as a result of the supply chain issues that upended the global economy. And those supply chain issues continued for Jamaica and brought in its wake higher inflation. And so that further impacted the lives, particularly of the most vulnerable in the society. And we were saying, and are still saying to the government, look, you have to pay some attention to this social cohesion, because it is what is at the root of the crime problem that, if not checked and is left unchecked, is going to upend the very economic program that you have placed almost fealty to the exclusion of a number of other programs. So it really for us is about the imbalances that have come about because of the policy and strategy being pursued by this administration. Hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, to some extent, yes. Yeah, interestingly, it's no surprise, but as you explain it, the Jamaican situation is also a reflection of what happens in the US. It's like a smaller version of what really is taking place in the US at the same time. Because the same thing is happening. All of these patterns have pretty much been the same, particularly since COVID. So of course, what you said is quite clear. I was just thinking more about in terms of if you were gonna highlight some of the shortcomings that they neglected, and that the PNP administration might be addressing.
Well, I mean, you asked me a specific question around the debt strategy, the debt reduction strategy, and I was trying to
yeah, well, that was the second part of the question. What I just said was the second part of the question, which you probably missed.
Yeah, well, the as a result, if you have a focus on really just a debt reduction strategy, then you miss a whole range of other possible interventions and strategies. And we are saying, for example, that to our mind, to address the issue of inflation, it can't just be a monetary policy issue. Monetary policy, which is aimed at just high interest rates, by themselves can't address the issue of inflation. And I don't see anywhere else in the world where persons are trying to grapple with this issue, in which there has been the singular focus on a fiscal strategy and a monetary policy of high interest rate that is running the economy. In the United States, for example, there is a record, and not only in the United States, in the entire Western world, that are pursuing a sort of similar framework. There is the understanding that a number of other things have to happen, because even as we try to wrestle with the imbalances, the issue of how we adapt to and integrate the climate strategy, green energy transition, how we address the economy itself, are things that the other economies are focused on. So in the United States, you've adopted your industrial strategy, policy and strategy that looks at incorporating the climate change, getting the economy going, generating sustainably high employment with livable wages. So it's a much more complicated and complex set of policy strategy than is being currently, the simplistic approach that is being currently pursued by the administration, which is a sort of a one-horse and one-pace donkey kind of arrangement. which is simply about monetary policy and strategy. So we are concerned about that. And again, it creates the imbalances.
What about the IMF? That kind of impact it in any way in terms of what you might be trying to do?
Well,
PNP administration might be trying to do.
Well, first of all, I mean, to the extent that we're not in a IMF program, there's a normal what you call an IMF surveillance program that it does an entire global economy, except of course the OECD economies, in which it almost has nothing to do or say about what they do. But in the developing countries, the IMF continues its what it called Article 4 monitoring and surveillance. So to that extent, but to the extent that we have no borrowing relationship, there is a standby arrangement with the IMF,
Okay.
but that is the extent of it, which really is a sort of insurance policy, but it's not grounded in a borrowing a program with policy implications for it. But so to that extent, you have a degree of flexibility in designing and implementing your policy strategies.
Okay.
And we've been through that because we pay the price of that. And so we have paid the price of some flexibility. And we believe the leadership in government have to be much more creative around the economic policy and strategy, which must include an integrated environmental and social policy and strategy.
What is the ratio of debt to GDP now?
My last reckoning is in its 70s, about 70 something.
So there's only a 10% reduction that is being aimed for, 60% in 2018. That's a small.
2018, or you get 2018.
I thought you said the date, the deadline to reach 60% was 2 year extended to
28.
28. I'm sorry, 28.
Yes, 2028. Yes.
But it can't be 70. No, it must be more than 70.
No, it's in this year. That's what I'm saying. It is 70 because they have proceeded on an expanded and an accelerated debt reduction strategy. That was a central core of my argument.
Okay, so it's only 10% then by 28.
Yeah, so it's very much achievable, and it was always achievable, and that was based not simply on the fiscal laws, but also on what the PNP did in the last administration to fix the revenue, the whole revenue system, so that we get the revenue inflows are quite significant. I mean, last time it was about 80 billion ahead of their own projection. So we fixed that system. So the system is getting the revenues in and ensuring that we are ahead of keeping pace with our debt strategy. But the question remains, having achieved that, what else do we do to address the crushing problems that the society faces of inflation, of crime, of this continuing or looming climate crisis? How are those integrated into the policy planning and strategy to cushion the impact on people's lives? That's what Mark Golding focused on in his presentation and called for a new direction.
But with all due respect, Mr. Hilton,
Sure, go ahead.
you spend a lot of time on fiscal policy. And I'm reminded of an article by Dan Roberts, two articles. One in March of this year, talking about Jamaica and get caught in a low technology and debt trap. And a second article in April which talk about the growth. aspect of the work. How we expand the economy to pay for some of the things that your party is proposing. And you haven't said anything about that.
No,
All we see in Jamaica right now is some low income, low skill jobs being offered. But there's no effort at training the working force. So what the PNP gonna do different? That's a question I want to ask. What when it
I'm,
comes to growth
no, but
of the
Michael,
Michael,
economy?
one second, Mr. Hilton. Michael, that it's funny because the question I had lead right into what you just said, right? So in answering that, Mr. Hilton, if you can speak to, because Mark Golden never mentioned it in his speech about expansion of the manufacturing base, right? He never speak about restoring or restructuring the agro industry, right? Which would be two strong points in terms of really building the economy. So can you say anything on that?
no. First of all, that is not correct. That is not correct. And I started with the assumption that if last week's program was about dissecting the speech, then you'll see in the speech, and I will emphasize here that what Mark was talking about was precisely that in terms of the new direction. He spoke specifically to the low wage, low tech conundrum and how to address that, and went straight to the education and training element, Michael. So I'm surprised that was missed in the speech of last week, was spent dissecting the speech. He went straight to that, to the education and the need to address the education and training component of the
Yeah, you didn't
economy.
mention that.
Yes, and he mentioned the agricultural sector. But again, in a speech that is televised and is timed, you don't get the chance to go into in depth and go off into a number of things. If you can recall, he at the end he was left with about 10% of the speech that was not brought live, but was in his written speech. So I'm saying we're doing all of this within a framework.
Yeah, we understand that, but
time
but
constraints.
here's the thing, Mr. Hilton, and this is mainly why you're here, right? Is that we understand with all the difficulties with the speech and so on, because they were having technical difficulties too, which
Yeah, that was
all
part
of
of it.
that played into it.
Right.
So we are hoping that you can probably expand on some of the things that he said in the speech, if you can, or bring out some of the highlights which we never quite get from the speech.
I'm quite prepared, but I'm saying we can't start with some false premises. He did address the issue of low wage and call for
Yes,
new
I heard
direction.
that. I heard that. But
Yeah, and call for new
yeah.
direction in the economy. And I said he went straight to the education and training component, touched on some the issues of agriculture, touched on the issue of technology and innovation. That must be a critical part of it. But it all starts with the education and training system. So in other words, if our position simply is this: the focus cannot simply be on monetary policy and debt reduction. It has to be a much more creative mix of policies that is going to seek to address the conundrum that we find ourselves in and the social crises and environmental challenges that the country faces. And it's that mix of policies and strategies that he attempted to speak to. And I'm here to answer any questions about that.
Ratigan, Herb, questions? I have a question.
Okay.
Right.
Might not. Go ahead, Ratigan.
I thought Herb, you going?
Yeah, yeah, I'll go. I'll go. Good day, Mr. Hilton,
Yes, yes, sir. How are you? Long time.
members of the panel, and members of our constituency out there that's listening. One of the concerns, Mr. Hilton, in a lot of the different programs I've been doing, is how can we be, as a nation, a small nation, and our people living at the poverty line, a lot of families cannot afford to feed themselves adequately. There's food insecurity threats, and when you take a stock, it goes beyond the food insecurity. We heard that the bauxite is the court lifted the injunction, and the bauxite was on its way back up, but we don't see any profits being made on the website at Ministry of Finance. So when you look at the things that were injurious to our population's health, and there was no land reclamation after these bauxite companies, they keep selling out to different entities and they leave in Jamaica. But you have these big storage units in different areas right next to high schools. The high school kids are getting sick every day, can't attend school. I mean, we're boasting about the debt to GDP ratio that went from a high of 147 down to 86, and the IMF predicting it will get down to 71. How can we be boasting about these things when we are at critical mass with food insecurity and the medical issues that exist in the rural areas where the bauxite is still being dug up and creating problems for the residents? And it's not just the bauxite; it's other areas where people just don't have, um, the jobs that pay the amount of money they need to survive as a family. And we have a lot of families out there.
Well, let me say it first.
Mr. Hilton, before you answer that question, Patrick, I'm getting a feedback from you.
From me?
Can you, yeah, you have something playing in the
I don't have
background?
any. No, there's nothing playing here.
Everybody should just mute Michael till
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Go ahead,
nothing.
Mr. Hilton.
All right, thank you, Herb. Firstly, let me just clarify. It is really the focus of what I'm saying. We are the PNP is not boasting about debt reduction. Debt reduction is something that we recognize is as a fiscal responsibility. And I repeat, that will remain, or our focus on the fiscal responsibility will remain, and that is ensured because it's not just a matter of policy; it's a matter of law. So we are not boasting about debt reduction. It is the opposite of what I'm saying. I'm saying there are some other mix of policies and strategies that must now be brought into play, and the environment is one of the things I mentioned, and climate change. And you're pointing to one of the challenges that is real and has now to be addressed. And that's a long-standing issue around how we deal with the whole matter of the extraction of bauxite in the ways that we do and in the places that we do, and in a way that ensures that there is some recognition, more profound recognition of its impact on the health and the livelihood of the overall economies, and particularly in the communities in which that activity is centered. So a debate, the People's National Party has been raising the need for a debate, and there have been uh, motions move, resolution move to have a serious debate in the parliament about the directions in which we must go in respect of the sustainability of the mining operation. In fact, there have been lawsuits brought um, to the courts to intervene in this imbalance, to address some of those issues. So that I don't know about boasting about this, and we have said, and I've outlined my brief outline, I've said that the environment and climate change is one of the new directions in which we are saying the country must go. So we share the concerns as you raise them, and I don't know that, to make the point very clearly, we are not boasting about debt reduction. Debt reduction should happen as a matter of fiscal responsibility. and that's in the law. That's the point I'm making. The question was asked if it's only 10% and why and why it's only a few percentage up, few percentage out. And I agree and said it is that way because we're way ahead, we're steaming ahead on debt reduction. So it is the strategy of this administration to focus on purely fiscal and purely monetary strategies and dealing with those macro issues, while the micro issues affecting communities and peoples are left for resolution and for answers.
I have a question, Mike.
Radical.
Yeah.
No, go ahead, Lars.
I want to thank Mr. Hilton for being here. I want to say I appreciate Mr. Hilton still making himself accessible. Give him a lot of credit for that. My question, though, is on the constitutional reform. I noticed that in his speech at the conference, Mark Golding, he said two things the PNP would be concentrating on in the constitutional reform. One, the PNP would focus on Jamaica becoming a republic, but also pay some attention to Jamaica making the Caribbean Court of Justice the final appellate court for the country. I want to ask you, Mr. Hilton, Mark Golding did not say that the PNP would be pursuing a strategy of comprehensive constitutional reform as the people are asking for at this time. Is it that he did not express it in that way, or is it that these are just the two focus of the party when it comes to constitutional reform?
Well, let me reassure the audiences. And declare that I'm a member of the Constitutional Reform Committee, and it's in that committee that the PNP strategy is clearest. And I think Mark Golding and the PNP have made it clear. Well, first of all, constitutional reform has been a PNP issue from the 70s, consistently, through to the 80s and the 90s, up to the 90s, when the Joint Select Committee addressed this issue in the last formal iteration. So let us be very clear that issue of constitutional reform is a PNP issue from day one and remains a PNP issue. The question of a comprehensive constitutional reform is one that the PNP does not shy away from, but embraces. However, this administration, as it's one government at a time, it has won an electoral mandate, in fact, an outsized electoral mandate, so that we have a majority, it has a majority of 49 members, we have 14 in the opposition, but 14 strong, very strong. And the administration of the day gets to identify the agenda and to push an agenda. It has stated what its agenda on constitutional reform is at the moment. And the way it has expressed it is that there's a recognition on its part that comprehensive constitutional reform is needed, will be pursued, but in phases. That's the way it has been expressed. So phase one, it is focused on the monarch replacing the monarchy as head of state, the British monarch as head of state, and replacing him with a Jamaican head of state. It has addressed the issue in that it chooses to address those issues that require a referendum. And those are set out in the Constitution very clearly as to what those issues are. We have said, the PNP have said, it is incongruous, it doesn't make sense to remove the monarch and to replace the monarch, but leave the monarch's court in place. Because it doesn't make sense, it's not logical to us, nor is it feasible. Right now, we don't have justice in its fullest sense because our final court of appeal is a Privy Council. And only 3 or 4 cases per year on average get to the Privy Council. Now, what kind of final court can you have in the world where there's only 3 or 4 cases after hundreds of cases that are appealed in our court of appeal? Only 3 or 4 on an average get to the Privy Council. And usually those are criminal matters. And it's not that there aren't fundamental issues affecting people's civil rights and civil matters, including commercial matters. The simple fact is that it is too expensive to get to the King's Council, the King's Privy Council. And the matter is made more insulting and painful for us because we are the only country that requires a visa to go to London, to go to petition the King in his Privy Council. So we have said, if you're going to remove the monarchy as head, which we support, then remove the court. Because you cannot get rid of the monarch, but yet is appealing to the monarch's court for justice. In a circumstance where it is really effectively denying justice because it's too expensive, it's inaccessible, and you have to get a visa. And to get a visa to go to London is no simple matter. And that includes not only the claimants or the litigants before the court, but the lawyers have to get visas to go to court. Now, I don't know. My sense of Jamaicanness does not allow me for that to sit still with me. Me upset about that, me personally, and we upset that can't be right. And so we have said that issue, if you're going to move the king and the thing, you move the court and give the people justice. And the Caribbean Court of Justice is in place and functional. Mr. Siaga, who was a previous leader who set out their ideology for the Labour Party, has said at the beginning that, well, it is too new and he want 15 years to see how it works. Well, it is 17 years, and by all accounts, the court has met the gold standard by all kinds of by the international community in the quality of justice, the timeliness of justice, and the accessibility of justice. And yet, we can't get an answer from this government as to what is its clear position on the court. All they're saying is, niet, 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 and you say, well, why? And they can't tell you why. So, and Mark Golding went further to say, sir, that the issue of impeachment and recall is also a matter of an accountability, also a matter of fundamental importance, and should be addressed in the constitutional reform in the way of a recall. So, yes, the PNP believes that the Constitution, the 62 Constitution, is an old Constitution and is not responsive to a lot of the issues of concern to the Jamaican population at this time.
Thank you.
And
First of all, let me thank all of the panelists, thank the listening audience, viewing audience, and thank Mr. Hilton, because as Lass said, he's always made himself available, unlike a lot of politicians that we've reached out to come and explain some of the policies that the Jamaican people are faced with. Now, having said that, Mr. Hamilton, I have about a half a dozen questions. I realize that time is of the essence. It's at a premium and I can't ask all of them. So I'm at a quandary right now. I'm trying to think which one to ask. But let me just ask it this one as a follow-up to the question posed by Lass. And please indulge me if I go a little bit long with the explanation. I'll try not to because I want to get to the question, but I need to just set out a little bit of the background. Now, in the speech, the opposition leader mentioned he mentioned removal of the monarchy as the head of state. He mentioned the Caribbean Court of Justice. He mentioned impeachment, recall, and he also mentioned that committees in Parliament should be chaired by the opposition, and that was the protocol until 2020 when the Prime Minister decided to change all of those things. Now, I took an interest in the Constitution, went back and started looking at it from first page to last page. And it's abundantly clear to me that this was not a constitution designed, created, implemented for the Jamaican people. This was purely a matter for the Crown to continue with its operation of Jamaica, but not on a daily basis, but through the real brogad, I call him, person called it Governor General. And about a week ago, I went through the Constitution and explained to people that the person with the real power in Jamaica is the Governor General. He may not exercise it, but constitutionally, the power is there. The question is this: because that Constitution was not written for us, isn't it a bit? Isn't it a bit a half-hearted effort then to kind of create something for the Jamaican people when we know that this is going to take a lot more work than originally thought? In essence, if your house are popped down, sometimes the best thing to do is to just demolish that house and come up with build something, a brand new structure. And because this Constitution is so heavily tainted in the monarchy's favor, tinkering with it, and I say tinkering, and I really mean tinkering, because we're not really getting to the heart of the power invested in the Governor General. We're not getting to that, because if we have to get to that and we say, okay, we're going to have a president, the question is, what will be the powers of the president? Will we transfer all of the powers of the Governor General to that president? Or will we somehow split up the powers and the Parliament will have some, this president will have some, and some other body or some other person will have some? Here's a question. Would it be a good idea to, instead of, the term you use, comprehensive reform, instead of comprehensive reform, do you think it would be a better idea to abolish and replace? Thanks.
Well, first of all, let me say that as you can appreciate, and I think most of your listeners can, but all should appreciate that the Constitution, which is our basic law, is it addresses a range of issues, particularly as it relates to the power structures of government and society. To abolish, as you suggest, Rattigan, while trying to operate a government, is something that requires great skill and a high level of consensus in the society. Otherwise, you're really tinkering with a lot of problems. Constitutions are rarely visited, and usually are done in crisis situation, because it is recognized and it is the experience that once you touch it, any aspect of it, you really are touching a whole heap of things, because it brings with it a number of other issues of concern to different segments of population and society. So it is something that is is addressed very carefully and sensibly, because as we learn from the French Revolution, that changes sometimes come with chaos. And if you don't manage it, it can eat you up and destroy you. So what we have to contemplate as a people, not just politicians, all of us have to contemplate, is a process that allows you to make fundamental changes even as you're trying to govern and to keep stability in your society and your economy. Because let us be very clear, the Constitution just doesn't deal with social, political issues. It is profoundly tied up with the economy as well. So all aspects of your society is involved in it. So my short answer to you, Rattigan, is this. A constitutional assembly, which is what is normally used as the mechanism for doing sort of full comprehensive reform, must be recognized, is a long running and complex thing, and it's not an overnight business. So we have to think it through, and if we commit, we have to there has to be clarity around that. And as I said, a degree of consensus will be needed, absent which there's a recipe for chaos. And we have to go to our people, and fundamentally what is needed, and part of the reason why this process is so difficult, is the lack of education, because we had eliminated civics and just the basic understanding of our constitution, of the document, for so long a period of time that most people now have to be re-educated in it. And so if that is going to be done, Rattigan, I would think that we'd first need fundamental education around the Constitution, not just the limited aspects that the government suggests it wants to deal with now. Because the government's theory is, the way it explains it, is that, and I can tell you, my experience on the committee is this, that there are a number of people in our society, a great number, when you look at those that are in favor of removing the monarchy, the number is fairly high. It's not stable, it keeps fluctuating, but a high degree of unanimity that be done. That's just on one aspect of the Constitution. If you take the rest, all the other parts of the Constitution, some of them, there's a level of ignorance and lack of education and understanding that doesn't allow for that degree of consensus. So my answer to you is, I don't think you can simply, I think it would, and let me go to the point, I think it would be highly irresponsible of any leadership to simply say, let us abolish the Constitution, let us replace it, without explaining to our people the deep challenges and the processes that will be involved, and that we're talking about years of debate and discussion at a minimum.
Let me just do a quick follow-up, Anita. Mr. Hilton, regarding the thought process behind the Constitution, you said that it's not a new issue for the PNP, that they've been thinking about this for quite some time.
Correct.
So right. So the question is, why is the thinking still going on? Because as you said, it takes some time. So if people are actually thinking about this, thinking about the Constitution and its impact and effects on the people of Jamaica and its history, and they wanted to make a change, this should have been discussed a while back. We shouldn't have been thinking about tinkering with it now and saying, well, you know what, it's going to take a constitutional assembly and it's going to take a long time. So that's point number one. Number two is this. I don't know if you're watching Reason with Rattigan on a Saturday, but it's something that you should. I know you're a busy man, but you probably can take some time out and watch it on YouTube, when you have some free time. Because one of the things we're doing on my program, we're teaching the Constitution, because you're absolutely correct. There's a level of ignorance in Jamaica. A lot of people regarding the Constitution, a lot of people have never read the document, and a substantial number of the people who have read the document, they don't understand the implication. They don't even understand the word and the words and the meaning contained therein. So what we're doing every Saturday is we're teaching the Constitution. We started with chapter 3, fundamental rights and freedoms, and we're teaching it to our people. And last week I did a piece on the power of the Governor General. So this is something that both parties should take, some lessons from, because this is something that first it shouldn't have been removed from schools. And once it was removed, somebody should have said, hey, you know what? Let's teach our people this thing, because this is a central document. And as you just said, it doesn't only talk about parliamentary functions. It touches on almost every aspect of Jamaican life. So being as significant as it is, we decided that we're not going to wait on opposition or government to teach this to our people. We're going to teach it to them, because at some point we believe there will be a referendum. People are going to be asked to vote on an issue, and chances are they don't even know what the issue is about. So it's not a question I'm asking. I'm just trying to just inform you about what we're doing to educate our people, and also the fact that the thought process behind whether or not we should abolish and replace, that should have taken place a while back. And I understand that it's not something that you can just suddenly get up and say, we're going to suspend government and we're going to spend the next 6 months or whatever to come up with a constitution. That's not the solution. The solution is the past. Or part of the solution is the past, in the sense that this is something that should have been done a while back, and here it is now. We're just tinkering with it, something that we should have started out, a long time ago. And still, I have to ask you the question. I have a question, because you're on that constitutional reform committee, and you said that they're doing it in phases. You also said that it's one government at a time, so they're driving the train. The government is driving the train. So the question for you is this: since you sit on that committee, is, as a committee, have you decided what will this president look like, and what will his powers be? Will he assume all of the powers of the Governor General right now, or is there a mechanism to distribute the power between the president and other parts of the government?
Well, let me come to the first. Let me answer the last question first. There is a subcommittee of that committee, of which I'm a member, that is dealing with this issue of the powers of the president. That subcommittee has just started its work about a week ago. So we're currently going through that exercise, which, as you have indicated, is a detailed and painstaking exercise. But that's a necessary part of the discussion and the process that is taking place. So I believe that in the not too long from now, that a recommendation, a set of recommendations will be made to the full committee, which will deliberate on that and then come forward with their own recommendation in this process. So yes, that is something that has to be addressed, or the powers of the Governor General, which in many instances and in many senses is the power of the monarch, that will have to be addressed, and how those powers gets distributed and allocated. So yeah, that's a process that I just started. Let me just say though, that first of all, I want to commend you on that process, because I think it's needed, and I also agree that it shouldn't be just left up to government. I mean, and if civil society, if persons like yourself and others, seeing the need and understanding the need for that, attempt to fill that gap and that void, then you ought to be commended, and I want to commend you. And when I do get the chance, I will catch up on a couple of the sessions that you're having. But having said that, one of the things you will point out, I'm sure, Rattigan, in the process, is that Jamaica, having gotten its independence first in the Commonwealth Caribbean, English-speaking Commonwealth Caribbean. It many times there's a price to be paid for being first. And I think our constitution, the constitution that was negotiated for our independence in London, was unnecessarily cumbersome in bringing about changes to that constitution. And you will agree, and as you recognize, you cannot make any fundamental changes in the constitution without a very involved and complex process. And the reason, having said the PNP has been driving this process from the 70s, the reason it has never come about is because all it takes is an opposition leader, as Mr. Siaga was, who was simply opposed to it. And all he has to say is niet, 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 meaning in Russian, no, no, no. And that's what has happened for decades in this process. And the Constitution, as you said, from time to time, after you pursue the Constitution to a certain extent, at other times you get almost weary because there are other issues of urgency that come about. And so that process was put down from 95, is now being taken up again. And hopefully this time, some are hoping and are saying, Rattigan, that particularly the elders in our population, and what I'd like you to do, and I'm going to challenge you and others to do, is they are the young people who are just coming up, many of whom have never even focused on the Constitution, never even thought about it in any serious ways. But they're also the older population who have wrestled with this issue of constitutional reform for decades and have grown weary of it, and are saying to us in the Constitutional Reform Committee, look, I'd like to see the reform happen before I die. And are saying, look, if it's even, and recognize that you're not going to get everything all at once, they're saying, and simply saying, look, bring home the Constitution, Jamaicanize it, get rid of the king, and then continue the process. But don't just sit and ask for the whole loaf of bread when you may not even get a half. Get going, build a momentum into the process, and hopefully we can take it to its logical conclusion step by step. That's the reasoning that is out there. So I'm just saying the consensus, and you have to address this point, Rattigan, to get to where you are. I'm not even sure you are proposing. I think you may well be reflecting the views of your audience, but as the leader on your platform, you have to ensure that they understand the complexity of change itself, because that process that is in the current Constitution in Section 49. Section 49 of the Constitution itself requires reform, in my view, because we must have a much more simple way of reforming our Constitution than the very complex way in which they intentionally put in the Constitution just so that Jamaica being the first to really discourage the rest coming behind Jamaica from seeking their independence, by just making it just absolutely difficult for further change to happen. So those are all historical contexts, but they face us now, and we have to deal with it.
Two quick things, Mr. Hilton, before you move from that topic.
Patrick, hold on a minute. Mr. Hilton, I'm not sure if you answer the question as to the PNP, the same song, or a new direction. You say a new direction, but I haven't heard anything in that regard. So let me ask you this.
Yeah, ask a specific question.
The PNP vote to support Juliet Holness as the Speaker of the House. Now, I think this is the first time in the Commonwealth where the Prime Minister is in charge of the cabinet. His wife set the agenda for the House. What is the logic of the PNP supporting that sort of structure?
Well, first of all, it's not a logic of supporting structure. the structure as is until the constitutional reform is effected. Then you have to manage and address the current system. And the current system is simple, that someone who is not a minister of government, which the prime minister's wife is not, should be elected from the parliament. The,
Yeah.
the majority is what it is, and they propose, they nominated and put forward Mrs. Holness. Now, the PNP's attitude could be, well, we're not supporting her, but who? And then let me just tell you, the government of the day has to continue because people's lives. In America, you're dealing now with a shutdown of the government. You just escape it by the skin of your teeth. We in Jamaica can't afford that. You have institutions in America that can well operate, and even then you're panicking about the shutdown. We can't afford a government that doesn't work in Jamaica because people's lives, daily lives, depend on it. So
you're saying that the Speaker of the House is essential to the functioning of the government?
of course
That's
it is.
why that's why Miss Holness had to be the
No,
Speaker.
that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you asked me a question, why the PNP support? That's the question you asked. That's a real question.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm saying to you that there's under the current system, what did the PNP would do? Elect who? You need to answer that. You need to consider.
PNP could have make a statement by voicing opposition, voting
And
opposition rather than going along with that suggestion. They had that option, right?
yeah, but this is not the new direction that we're talking about.
Okay.
This is not the new direction. This is the issue. The issue is raised that, well, it is a conflict, but there's no conflict of interest in the sense. There's no conflict of interest. When matters come to both the prime minister and his wife are in the parliament. That's a fact. People elected them to the parliament, right? There are other. So if I follow your logic of what you're saying, any relationships should be opposed and immediately introduces a conflict. And what is a conflict? Could you point out to your audience what the conflict is, the fundamental conflict is?
You don't see,
Well,
you don't
hold
see a
on.
conflict. Go ahead,
Well,
man.
no, Mr. Hilton, I don't know Patrick want to jump in, but Patrick, Mr. Hilton, quick question.
Yeah.
Speaker Marissa Dalrymple Philibert resigned. Dalrymple, sorry, yeah, resigned as a result of the Integrity Commission's investigation and
Charges
request for
against.
prosecution.
Right.
Now, if it, and I know this is a hypothetical, and I know you're not a man given to hypotheticals, but I'm going to see if I can catch you, if I can get you for just squeeze an answer out of you on this one.
Remember, he's a lawyer, you know.
Yeah, I know. But Mr. Hilton, if it turns out that she's one of the six, well, first thing is this: now that she's a speaker, will the PNP continue to ask for the release of the names? And if it turns out that she's on that list, will the PNP ask for her to resign?
Well, first of all, if you watch this very sitting that Michael referenced, the moment the speaker was in the seat, we asked for the release of that information. So the answer, we asked the question. We said we asked the question because we honestly don't know. We said the report that mentions the investigation. Did this report? Well, we asked, when is that report going to be released? Because we want to see, right? No, we don't know as of now whether that report identifies the six. We don't know. So by asking for the report to be tabled, we will know. The speaker then said, look, I've just assumed the speaker's chair just this minute. She will have to look into it and report to the parliament on Tuesday coming. That's a reasonable response. Will PNP is not going to get up and say, well, come out of the chair because, I mean, that's a reasonable response. She just assumed the chair. She said, give her a week to come back to the parliament.
Mr. Hilton, listen, the report was provided to 4 people in parliament based on my reading of it. The report was provided by the Integrity Commission to the clerk, to Mr. Senator Tom Tavares Vincent, to Speaker Dalrymple, and also to this current speaker. So
no.
Did you see it? Did you see the report?
No, be careful. No. I'm talking about. I have now to address what the Integrity Commission says, and I think where you may be confused, and we have to be clear, Wilfred, is the report on the Speaker Dalrymple was exceptionally provided to the 4, and the Integrity Commission explained why it followed that unusual procedure, because the normal procedure.
Who are the 4?
The 4 that Wilfred just listed, the Speaker and the Clerk and the Deputy Speaker. Right?
Okay.
But that is in respect of Marissa Dalrymple's report, and it go on to explain that the reason they did that was because the Speaker herself was a subject of the report, and that she may want to recuse herself. They were very careful in what they have to say. So my point is, the normal procedure, Wilfred, is that the report from the Integrity Commission goes to the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House. Those two, and those two alone. So the report containing the investigation around the 6 went to the Speaker, the former Speaker, and the President of the Senate. Mrs. Holness' response, when she was asked about the report, she said, well, she just assumed the chair give her at least a time to look at her brief and come back on Tuesday. So Tuesday will come.
Okay, Mr. Hilton, Herb, just a quick one here, Michael. The husband of the Speaker, as was implicated by the Integrity Commission, as not having, his last 2 filings were rejected. And I don't know if we have a joint tax filing system like we do here in the US, in Jamaica. Because if his filings have been rejected, then you have to assume that his wife's information is tied up with his. We see where the wife and Garvin and the PM himself own a finance company together, and we also see clearly where they're in business in the construction arena. And 34 contracts was pushed to Garvin by the PM inside and outside of his area of responsibility by him. In other words, he was encroaching on somebody else's territory. If all that is what the Integrity Commission has published, how can she escape any other implication other than she is probably the accountant or the brains behind the scheming that was going on since 2005? And how can they escape not doing the same to her that they did to him early on? So, I mean, if I had to give another parallel example, is those people who lost their visas and are trying to get it back, the U.S. government won't give it back because, and in the case where they took the wife's visa, with one exception, of course, where they took the wife's visa, they won't give it back because the wife should have been aware of what the husband was doing. And it makes sense. But as an analyst, when you track and trace the family's wealth and the family's involvement in chicanery, that, yes, the wife usually knows, but they went exceptionally further because they also took visas from the children. So the children are old enough to know that some fathers were up to no good. And so they took their visas as well. So in other words, they're telling the children and the wife, you should have reported your father or your husband. So is the integrity of the parliament less than what that example that I just attested to? And is she most likely to avoid embarrassment if she is aware of anything? Is she going to follow Dalrymple's example? I think that's what everybody's looking at.
Well, let me say this to you. That is inviting me into a realm of speculation that I will not enter into.
I mean, this is, I'm using the Integrity Commission's report now that they publish against the Prime Minister. So that's not speculative. I'm just giving you the paradigm.
No, my friend. Listen, you know, I have a little more experience than that. You started there, but that's not where you ended. By the time you ended, you've taken me to about 3 or 4 different levels of speculation. And I'm simply saying, I am not going to enter on that reference today.
Okay, let's move on to another topic. The same thing.
Yeah, no, before we move on, I had a question in follow-up on the constitutional aspect. Mr. Hilton, and I know you pretty much should be aware of this, because even when you mentioned the French Revolution and so on. Of course, the Constitution of Jamaica is something that was actually handed to us by the British monarchy, right, or the British rule. And right after, of course, Trinidad got their independence, and Trinidad had since moved to become a republic, right? We know there was serious problems there, even as it pertained to the Constitution and so on. Can you say anything, draw anything from the Trinidadian experience that we can learn? That's one. And then two, the other aspect is, I don't know how many people are aware of this, but that the British does not have a constitution, and they have wrestled with a constitutional issue for centuries.
Well, it is true that the British doesn't have a written constitution, but they are very steeped in their convention. They have, and this is how the common law began. So I'm just saying to you, my friend, it is not the same. It is not the same. They have centuries of conventional matters and dealings that they abide by. We don't, and we didn't have in '62, and therefore we couldn't rely simply on those conventions. Since then, we have dealt with a number of statutory, we have legislated on a number of issues, and we have developed our own practices, and I would say some level of convention. So, yeah, but it's a different period. So,
Understood.
Yeah, they have chosen not to enshrine it in a written constitution, and it has its pluses and its minuses.
Yeah.
Anyway,
No,
going to the Trinidad.
Question, Mike.
Going to Trinidad.
No, you're still answering the question.
Yes, I'm going to Trinidad.
Right.
As I said at the beginning, when I referenced the Constitution, Jamaica was the first in the English-speaking Commonwealth to get its independence, and it meant
That's right.
and it
And
meant
we
that
don't have republic yet.
yeah, but it meant that, and I hope you, and I'm glad you put that in the background, because this is a point I'll reiterate. When when we settle the constitution, those negotiations, being the first have its plus, but it also have its minuses. And in this case, being the first, went through the most arduous, the most difficult set of negotiations. And it wasn't, as you said, simply handed to us. It was a process of negotiation where the monarch, which had full reign over colonial Jamaica, they didn't come up overnight, and they gave way because of the resistance and all kinds of, and the difficulty in the post-war period faced by the British. So it's a number of, so the context in which that independence came about have to be appreciated. So what's my point? My point is that being the first meant that we had the most complicated of the constitutions. I mentioned section 49 of the Constitution, which sets out the reform process. And no other Commonwealth Caribbean country, by the time Barbados came to independence, they didn't even have to go to referendum. All they had to do is to have a consensus in their parliament. So I'm just making the point that because we were first, we have gotten we have gotten the most complicated, the most difficult to change constitution of any of the Commonwealth Constitution, including Trinidad, which came after us and was the one that came immediately after us, but we were able to get better terms because we had been dragged through the mud and the coal and beaten up on. All right? No, even so, yeah, there are some things we in this process that I'm involved in. We reference a number of constitutions from the English-speaking Caribbean to several other constitutions, including the Trinidad Constitution. And there are some lessons we're learning and some things we're drawing on to deal with the issue of saying the president and what the presidency could look like, for example. They have their own approach. Barbados have their own approach. But one of the things that we learned is that the Trinidadians retained the Privy Council. Why? And people are saying, well, if Trinidad retained the Privy Council, why can't Jamaica retain the Privy Council? Well, Trinidad did two things. They didn't retain it in the form that it currently is, as simple as a Privy Council, but also the Caribbean Court of Justice did not exist, nor is Trinidad imposed, nor is a visa to go to London imposed on Trinidad. I rest my case there.
Mr. Hilton, I listened to you on the speaker position. Personally, I think the PNP sent the wrong message by supporting Juliet Holness as speaker, because people gonna say, well, I see there, the whole politicians protect themselves and the whole them are the same. At a time when the PNP should be making and determined effort to separate itself from, make that distinction. But my question, and I really want to get to.
Mike, let me address it. Let me address something. Let me just say it quickly, Mikey.
Go
Again, let us appreciate. I mean, part of our job, all of us on this platform and elsewhere, we have to help educate our people. We can't just follow back at them. We have to help to educate, like Ratican is doing on the Constitution. Let us help lead and explain rather than jump into what's popular. The fact is that it's simpler convention in the House. When you break rank against the speaker, whoever he or she is, whatever happens to the speaker now, will happen. It's a matter to come. But we haven't been elected, and the PNP can't nominate another one. It won't be elected. I'm just saying, there's a simple convention and that operate in the House that makes sense when you try to have a civilized parliament and to do the business of the people. So that have nothing to do with PNP agreeing or disagreeing. We never nominate her, but having been nominated and we can't nominate anybody of who won or wouldn't, then what's the point? What are we going to do? Have a hung parliament and we get no business? We can't have a hung parliament in the way you have a hung Senate, a House, and crash your system.
Mr. Hilton, it would not. There would be
And
no hung parliament because the JLP is the dominant party in the parliament. All I'm saying is that at a time when the PNP should be making an effort to distinguish itself from the Jamaica Labour Party, action like this only reinforce certain perception the people have of the politicians. Okay, see, they look after
Well,
each
answer your
other,
question.
regardless of what happens.
Well, let me just say
Go
to you,
ahead.
Mike. I just say to you, Mikey, and others listening. I think there are more substantive things the PNP can distinguish itself on, and we should go about the business of not majoring in minor and just dealing with what is it we know is the people's business.
All right, well, let's move on to this one then.
Yeah.
and Mikey,
Grassroots
I have a
democracy, community council. How the PNP remains silent on this? They mentioned the recall mechanism. Now there is a poll making the rounds since this week about people 2 terms and politician and all what have you. What is the PNP position when it comes to the issue of grassroots democracy, empowering citizens to play a much bigger role in their community?
Well, those position is very clear, Mike, and it has not changed. It simply has not changed. And what there may be different names, because let me tell you,
Okay.
we can engage in some Cold War discussion about what obtained then and what you call it now. And but it's not about what you call it. It's about how it functions. Because as Mao Zedong said in respect of China, when they asked him, well, why are you changing your system to embrace the market economy? Mao Zedong answer was simply, he said, I only have one question to ask. Can it catch mice? If you ever can it catch the mice? Does it work? So I don't want us to get hung up in labels, whether you call it community council or you call it something else. What we are aimed at is the citizens in their community engaging, and this is why we created the PNP under PJ Patterson, created space for non-governmental organizations, NGOs, right? And it's for community at the community level. In my constituency, I give preference to community organizations that are legitimate community organizations that are grassroots, that are built by them, not by the MP, but by them. And they will tell you, once they petition me to say, look, MP, we have something we want you to come and meet with us, I go and meet with them. So I'm just saying, and that is still our philosophy, that space should be created for non-governmental systems and organs, whatever you call them. You may call them community council, you may call them committees of whatever kind, but once they're genuine grassroots organization, they have a place and a critical role in the body politics, and they should be listened to and serviced by the members of parliament and councillors.
and the
Any
question.
question?
I have a question. Yeah. Mark Golding in his speech mentioned about social transformation. He mentioned about things like the peace management units and, how to deal with some aspects of the crime and what's driving the crime in the communities. I want to ask you, what will the PNP be doing in terms of infrastructure development in the inner city areas, which is breeding a lot of crime, and these are the areas where most of the people are suffering from the worst situations of poverty? How will the PNP be dealing with those issues?
Well, first of all, I'll speak to it, but first of all, let me just say that we should not repeat some falsehood. the situation of poverty in Jamaica is worse in rural Jamaica. Rural poverty is worse. It is true that urban poverty have a particular quality to it because the quality of that is different, but the poverty levels and the indicators are clear. Rural poverty is something requiring urgent attention as well. Now, in answering your question about urban infrastructure, it is very clear. I serve an inner city community and I know what the problems are. And the problems of housing in the inner city is critical. The infrastructures in mature communities like Waterhouse, for example, that is in my constituency. Waterhouse is a community that over time it has very good infrastructure layout. But in terms of the maintenance and upgrade of those infrastructure, there's been significant neglect in terms of the quantum of resources to address those particular issues. We are going about it in a piecemeal kind of way, bit by bit, 2 roads, 3 roads, looking at housing here, trying to address this here. What is needed is a holistic program. And I have said to my party leader that, and I've said it publicly, that the last conference we had, which was in not the last conference we had in Waterhouse, which was not this year but last year, I raised the matter frontally with the party leader and said I need a commitment from him that when we return to power, constituency like mine and the inner city communities will get serious attention with respect to the infrastructure issues of roads and other infrastructure. Housing and roads are the 2 critical ones. The health infrastructure, all of those are critical infrastructure. So yes, I can tell you that I believe, and I will be pressing for, and I'll be, if God willing, I'm currently an opposition spokesman. If it forms followed, I should be in the cabinet, and I will be pushing for this. And the other good point is I don't have to push too hard because Mark Golden himself is a member of parliament for an inner city, so he understands the critical urgencies and the need for the infrastructure community. So you can expect that we'll move full force to deal with those issues.
Okay. Particularly on the question of housing, Mr. Hilton, I know there's been, since the time of Michael Manley, a lot of the politicians seem to think that building or investing in new schemes, new housing developments, seems to have some greater payoff than redevelopment of those what you call mature communities, especially in the Kingston and St. Andrew space. Will that be a continuation of the next PNP administration, or will they change that kind of strategy?
Well, I think you'd like to see a mix because, of course, there are situations that will admit of sort of regeneration of housing stock and other areas. But there'll be new opportunities to build new areas. So I think you'd have to look at a combination of things. And I can't tell you we'll do one to the exclusion of the other. Both needs to be done, and where it makes sense that we rehabilitate and regentrify, we'll do that. But we are not on a program simply to build new, just to build something new and shiny. We want to build something that makes sense in the context of the community. And I would quickly add that underlying that is a question of land. And we know that in these inner cities, there are some very complicated land situations, particularly in the big yard communities, that we are going to have to deal with, and we've started to think through how we're going to have to reform the current law to address some of those situations. So yeah, those are some low-hanging fruits that you can expect that we'll be dealing with.
John,
Mikey, Mikey, one quick thing. Somebody's asking for the
One
telephone
more
number.
question, Mr. Hilton.
No, 1 second, last. Mikey, just put up if you can put up the banner with the telephone number. People are asking because they want to call in. Hello? The phone number. People want to call in, so they're okay. Thanks. All right. Sorry. Go ahead, Les.
Did he hear you?
Oh, last look like last having some problem.
I look like he's frozen.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to
Yes,
make a comment.
Who is frozen?
Oh, you're
Last-
not
last-
frozen.
One other
have-
question for Mr. Hilton.
Having problem. Last year not coming through clearly. He's frozen, but we still hear him intermittently.
Yes. I want to ask Mr. Hilton. Mr. Golding mentioned about not hearing me.
I'm
Not
hearing,
clearly.
I'm
Not
You're
clearly.
breaking up.
Look like Michael having
Not
issues.
hearing me.
Yep, go ahead. I'm hearing you, Mr. Crawford.
Ask the question again, last. He's frozen completely now. Maybe you should go ahead with your question, John.
Yeah, Mr.
Yeah, it's more of
Mikey, are you here?
well, I've been listening. First of all, greetings everybody. And Mr. Hilton, greetings to you.
Thank you.
Yes. Nita never him ask a question, but he move away from it. And I think we have to be careful that we don't focus so heavily on the tree that we lose sight of the forest. The big question that Nita posed for this meeting was, is the PNP same song or a new direction? And we had you weren't here last time, but we had a conversation on it. And the more this meeting is going on, is the more it looked to me like the question is answered. Because the issues that the ordinary working people face, which are commented on, I would say, in the speech by Golding, but not addressed with any vigor, with any focus, with any urgency. Crime.
Those are your words, of course.
Yeah, my words. Your right is my words. Education, unemployment, housing, corruption. Just since we're in this meeting, while it is true that constitutional reform is important, it's not the be all or end all. And the question that we should be asking ourselves, and I am asking you, Mr. Hilton, is to what extent are these things being addressed, or are we looking at a same old PNP, a same song PNP, a PNP that is going to focus on administrative change, not transformative change? And that's the question that I want to put to you. so that we don't lose sight of why we're spending 2 hours on a Sunday in this meeting. Well, that's why I am here. I can't speak for anybody else, but certainly I don't want to lose sight of that we're so focused on the tree that we lose sight of the forest.
Well, I mean, I must tell you, you sound very ominous at the start, but you really haven't asked a serious question. The issue, you're saying that all the issues that Mark Golding attempted to address, you then put your own word on it, and you qualify it by saying they're not serious, they're not urgent, they're not. Well, fine. Those are your views, as I pointed out. But the fact is, and everybody's going to draw their own conclusion about whether this is the same old or it's new. What we in the shadow cabinet and in the parliament are aiming to do is to, first of all, making sure that the issues that preoccupies us are the issues that will have an impact on the lives of the Jamaican people. Now, some people want revolution, and some people want evolution, and some people want nothing. Some people want continuation of the same thing that the government is doing. We are doing none of those extremes. We're not talking about a revolution like the French.
I'm not talking about that either.
No. So what are you talking about?
I'm talking about a transformation that speaks of the country.
Yes, that speaks. So yeah, go ahead and enlighten me.
That speaks to the things I just outlined, right? And let me tell you how I perceive. You tell me that you're from a certain community, and you said to Golding, he's from a Kingston community as well. When I was teaching at Trenchtown, the condition of Trenchtown, that is what, 40, 50 years ago. If I go there tomorrow, there's nothing different. There's nothing different. PNP come in, PNP come out. JLP come in, JLP come out. How has these communities transformed themselves? I like to point to the photograph that is behind Rattigan, because it reminds me every day about how things were down there in those communities. How has that changed? Zinc roof and concrete and dirt floor, no toilet, and disease. In Kingston, you talk about rural housing. This is in the capital of the country. So that is what I am looking at. And that is what I'm saying there. If we continue to wait on the People's National Party in its present form to address these issues, another 50 years going past, or 30 years, whatever, 2 more generations.
But first of all, let me respond to you. If you said you know the inner city well, and while I will agree, and as I said to you before, I know the depths of the challenges that we face in communities like ours. What I'll say to you is that if you say that the People's National Party has done nothing in the uplifting of the masses of the people, whether it be in the rural area or in the urban area, then we disagree. But you have the mic, you can speak for yourself, and you're doing that. But I don't have the luxury as a member of parliament or as a minister to just engage in this word. So I have to get to some practical things. And I thought that today was about the content of the speech and where it was going. So
Well, let me ask you, can I ask you one question, Mr. Hilton?
more than
Why
one.
did the PNP win 14 seats in the last election compared to the Labour Party, 46 seats? And I don't remember what the percent of the vote was. I wrote it down, but I can't find it. But it's the same, it's a comparative percent. So what you had in the last election, which is just 2 years ago or whenever, I'm not even focused on specifics so much. I'm focusing on the trends. If there was an address of the issues that the people were bawling over, how come you could get 14 seats?
Well,
And it's a massive defeat.
first of all, sir, let me say this, and we've said it time and again, and would admit the People's National Party in the last administration of which I was a part. The work that we did was fundamentally about correcting the system that produced for us, in that we were the ones that put in place the fiscal measures, put in place the improved measures, that the kinds of revenues that are being advanced now is what create the space. We inherited an IMF program that the JLP left, that was that had taken Jamaica to the brink, if you recall. But of course, you may not remember. But if you recall, when we went into office, we could not, the IMF, the institution in the world of last resort, for lending of last resort, refused to lend Jamaica money. Why? Because the Jamaica Labour Party government previous walked away from its program, walked away from it. We therefore have to come behind and convince them that Jamaica needs an opportunity to rebalance and to begin to deal with some of those issues. Do you recall that? That was the circumstance under which we came to government?
No, I'm listening to you, sir.
No,
I'm
no, no, no,
listening
no.
to you.
I'm asking if you recall any of that.
Well, I wasn't, to be honest with you, I wasn't living home.
Oh, okay. But you said if you go down to Trenchtown or where
Yeah, every time I go down there, I don't have to live.
but
It's so stark.
you haven't satisfied yourself to understand why and what happened. You mean to tell me you haven't satisfied yourself about that? So
No,
you're away.
what do you
You're
mean
away.
satisfy myself? What
You
I
were
can say,
away. You were away. You come back.
if I come home, when I come home and I visit these communities, they are no different than the zinc thing that is sitting behind Rattigan right now in the picture.
All right. Let me just say it. Here's where I'm not going to debate. What I am interested in, as a member of the People's National Party, in the Parliament and in the shadow cabinet, I am interested in those measures, those policies, those programs that first of all ensure that we have an economy that can produce the goods and services, the revenue that will allow us to invest in the critical things that are going to impact the people's lives. That's my interest. So you're interested in describing what is. I'm not interested. I know that. I see what is there because I see it every day. What I'm interested in is what are the measures that are going to address those issues. And that is what I am concerned about. This is what I am preoccupied with. And the rhetoric that you come with really is neither here nor there to me, quite frankly. That's just rhetoric.
If I can state this, I think what John is getting at
Any other?
is that it appears that the people with those zinc fences and those thatch roofs or zinc roofs, those people are not being trained. They're not being guided in a different direction to where Hart could have gone in, retrain them in some skill sets to allow them to earn enough funds to change their situation. Or if the government had provided, or governments, I should say, along the way in the past decades provided funding that would have brought them out of that situation and allowed them to move if they had to, and to refurbish the entire area.
Let
We
me
heard the Prime Minister himself talking about replacing zinc fences in certain communities, possibly Olympic Way, where he's from. So, is it possible that we can make these zinc fences disappear along with the wood and all the other messed up look that's out there, and get these people retrained and allow them to earn a living above what they would earn working at Burger King or Juicy Patties or one of these places? This is the kind of input into communities that would be needed. And is Project Star part of what could bring that to these communities?
Well, I'm glad you put it in that way, and I find that far more useful than the previous question, quite frankly. Let me
Well, I
tell you
know
what.
I'm sorry.
Let me tell you
Merv,
what. Let me tell you what I am
I mean,
doing.
Anthony,
Let me tell
I
you, sir,
can't put it that
sir,
way because it's
sir,
not about making the place
sir,
look better.
sir,
It's
sir,
about providing
sir,
housing.
sir. It's not simply about providing housing. Housing is just one element and one aspect of it. Let me, if you mind, let me answer what I think is a much more beneficial question. Let me tell you what I am doing in my constituency. This September past, I have one high school in my constituency, and that's Edith Dalton James High School in Duane Park. This September past, we achieved something that I conceived of and pursued much longer than I would have wanted to. I had hoped I could have done it in one fiscal term rather than the several that I pursued it. But what eventuated this September was a school that had no real direction from the Ministry of Education, a school that was put on a shift system and really just there to cater to the children of the poor that had very little option. Well, what we have done this term is to give it a direction, which is to ensure that for the first time in Jamaica, high school at that level will be pursuing a program of training and study that is aimed at addressing the needs of the real economy in Jamaica, namely, in this case, to address the big problem that faces the world and Jamaica, which is about its supply chain and its logistics operations. Those are fundamental to businesses, small and large businesses, and is one of the keys to Jamaica's integration into the economy and for us to create the opportunity for investment and to lift our skill sets. So we are training those youngsters when they leave high school after this term in Edith Dalton James, they will not only have trained themselves in some of the technical issues, but issues of survival of getting their license. They believe in high school with their licenses to drive an articulated truck, which is what is in demand here and globally, and make more money than most people make in some of the profession that they make. We are putting in training at the school level. We are also, I've spoken about the heart program that we are putting in place in Seaview Gardens, aimed at transforming those outer schools. So we talk about those in school, we talk about those outer school, and bringing them into the training net and to give them a skill that is both current, relevant, and is better paying, that pays livable wages. And that is consistent with what the leader has said, which was we have to focus on our education system from beginning, from root to branch. We have to make a transformative impact. So it's not just at the basic school level, We have to go from basic school all the way through, and to create the practical skills. Look at what is relevant in the world, in the society, and what industry, the needs of industries are at the moment. So those things. But let me just say, those require resources. We have to prioritize those resources. 100 things can't be priority. So we have to focus on what are the critical 4 or 5 things that must be done, and be done now. And I think the leader attempted to spell that out, put that on the agenda. And of course, like anything else, you don't have more than an hour and a half to address nobody before they fall asleep in any speech or any statement. So that's a work in progress, and that is a statement that is made of intent, and you'll hear more in terms of the policies and specific programs that flows from that.
On that note, Tony, can Mark mention the community build recording studio program? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that comes from a recognition that, look, our history, the history we've had of property.
We started in Waterhouse. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm coming to that. The history of real property is one that has been at the heart of our colonial system, and our land has been distributed. Where the real opportunities rest for Jamaica is intellectual property. Intellectual property. And that lies in the creativity of our people, of which there is an abundance of creativity. And none more so than in Waterhouse and communities like that, where we've had creativity, innovation, live and practiced for decades. And therefore, we thought that, and we pursued, from the time I came into that community, we pursued the program where we seek to address that creative element in the community, whether it be working with existing students like Jammies and others, which I have, and to start now to build new programs to put in recording studios, and some of it we are doing, and some of it the youngsters are doing on their own. So that's the recognition that the creative element and the intellectual property that we believe is what is going to impel Jamaica forward is what needs to be unleashed throughout our economy and our society, is what the leader recognizes and is giving focus to, which is that it's not only for the private sector or the private entrepreneur, although they're doing what they're doing, but there's an element, there's a sense in which the government have to play its part by introducing those studios at the community level, properly managed, of course, because we've learned lessons that you can't just build them and just leave them like that. You have to have the community involvement, community ownership of the program. But it is a necessary investment that we need to make, and therefore he's committed to doing that.
Michael.
Yes, my brother, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Hilton, Rattigan again.
One question.
Yeah, let me ask you this. I want to go back to the speech, because I get the sense that while you're amenable to discussing other issues, you're on the impression that we're here to discuss the speech. So let's talk about the speech. In the speech, I think it's
no, Rattigan, no. I'm here to discuss anything you want to discuss.
Okay, all right, cool. Well, let me go to the speech then. I quote, the opposition leader said, "We will focus on properly equipping our police and the justice system with the legislation, tools, technology, and human resources to carry out their work." That's on page 22. Now, given the fact that this Minister of National Security made a public proclamation, I think it was last year, that the government has been spending 1.2 billion, that's with a B, US dollars, since 2016. And it will end, the spending will end fiscal year 2022-2023, which will end March of next year. Now, he said that they've spent that on equipment, they've spent that on technology, they've spent that on human resources, and we know that they've passed legislation, the new Firearms Act, and I think the Bail Act passed, or it's still somewhere in Parliament. So they're doing all of these things. When the opposition leader says that we will focus on these things that are being done, and I say that with tongue in cheek, is that focus misplaced? Or
No,
should it be?
No, it's not, because the approach must be a holistic one. You can't just focus on one element and one part. It must be a holistic view, a 360-degree view of what needs to be done. Because other than that, if you don't do that, then what you're doing is you because of when you change some things, it impacts some other parts of the system. Now, as you said, when you said they said they're doing these things, well, we don't agree that all of what they're doing is what needs to be done. We don't agree, and that debate has been constant. The opposition has been constantly saying you're not doing some of the right things, and some of what you're doing is not sufficient. So, for example, even while they're doing all of those things they say they're doing, some of which are visible, some of which are not visible. It is just this week in the Parliament that they pass amendment to the zones of special operation. The zone of special am I being heard?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I'm hearing you.
All right.
Yes,
So
yes.
yeah, so I was continuing. So it's just past week. So after all of that, which they said they're doing, Rattigan, it's just this week that the House passed an amendment that we have been seeking for the last year and a half to get done, which is to complement this crime fighting strategy that the government claims it has. And we're saying to them that it is an unbalanced strategy, because it focuses on crime repression and nothing to do with dealing with the root causes and addressing some of those issues. And so even as we support the zone of special operation, which looks not only to tight policing, but to look to addressing some of the issues at the bottom of the root cause, at the bottom of the communities, like the boxing programs that we're talking about, like the training program, like the other skills program, education program. They just passed it after a year and a half. They just put it in place last week. So I'm just saying we recognize that this must be a continuing issue, because crime, until we address in a fundamental way the crime monster, then we have a problem. So I don't know that you can disagree, Rattigan, that if he says. So my question to you is, why you say you shouldn't say we're going to maintain focus on that?
No, I never said that. The question I asked was it misplaced?
No,
Asking,
no.
Right. But let me address what you just said though. Because I'm not focused on the root causes. I'm focused on properly equipping the law enforcement and judiciary to deal with problems caused by the root causes. So for example, when he says that we will focus on properly equipping our police, the question I'm asking, how? What will you do different than what's been done with the $1.2 billion now? When he says I'm gonna get technology implemented, I'm asking what technology? What will you do differently than what's being done now? When he said human resources, I'm saying okay, they have an intensified program of recruitment. So what will your focus be on that? So I'm referring specifically to the issues he raised, to say if you're going to be focused on that and the focus is already there, wouldn't it be better for you to shift your focus now to, like what you said, to the root causes, because these things are being addressed already based on what we've heard and the money.
But as I said to you, and look, the government has put its finger on it, is spending what it assesses to be the current need of the force. I'm saying that the first thing you do when you assume office is to do your audit. You have your regular audits that are carried out, but we have to do a baseline audit of what is in place. So you go there with a view in terms of your observation and the data that are available to you, remembering that opposition don't have access to all the data and all the information. As much as we would have liked to see a much more transparent system, there are reasons why certain programs and the details around certain programs are not immediately available. So the first thing you have to do is to take an inventory and an audit of what those are. And then you can separate what was just talk from what has actually been accomplished. And then you can assess. But I think you'll agree that one, the fight against crime, they're not winning that fight at the moment. So it's not time for us. None of us can claim that it's time for us to shift focus from any parts of it. You have to look at the elements of it, and you have to look at what are the important elements. Now, to the extent that they've addressed them, and we take a baseline audit and we say, yes, well, this is what we believe is necessary and it's in place, then fine. You deal with the other aspects of it. But I think the broader point he was making is he will not lose focus on the crime issue and the fight against crime. That's the broader point he was making.
I agree with you 100% that the crime fighting initiative in Jamaica is a complete failure from top to bottom.
Right.
And so I present to you this question: does the PNP have a crime plan? And if it does, what is that crime plan?
Well, look, what the crime plan is, I can tell you, it has its strategy and the elements that it is considering and working now. I'm not a part of that committee.
So it doesn't have a crime plan right now as we speak.
No, but it doesn't require to have a crime plan right now.
Yeah, but if you're planning to go into if you're a government in waiting, you can't wait till you get in to come up with a crime.
That's not the point. I'm saying to you, I can't articulate I am the investment minister.
I understand.
I can't articulate a crime plan to you.
I understand.
Okay, that's all I was saying.
Okay.
Any additional questions, comments for Mr. Hilton?
Yes. I can't recall if this issue was addressed in my Golding speech, but I want to ask Mr. Hilton, in the next PNP government, will the PNP government be pursuing legislation to give us in the diaspora the right to vote?
Well, let me put it this way. I don't know about you'd have to be a bit more specific about that. What I can tell you, we have said and have done, is that we have said that we are interested in coming to this issue in two ways. One, in the constitutional reform that is currently taking place, we have pressed for there to be a deletion from our constitution of the Commonwealth as the framework for voting. In the current constitution, once you're a citizen of any of the Commonwealth country, even Pakistan and Bangladesh and others, you can just come to Jamaica and live for
1 year.
months.
1 year.
1 year. Yeah, one year. And become a citizen and vote.
Mm-hmm.
When someone from the US who may have dual citizenship but living in Jamaica is not considered eligible to vote. So we believe that is something that is critical, that is something that needs to be addressed, and it is being addressed in the current constitutional reform effort. The other issue is that we believe that, and you're talking to someone who, like most of you, lived in the diaspora for decades, and I made a choice to come home to give service. But I don't believe that it should be a requirement that you come to Jamaica physically to make a contribution. The technology is so advanced that I believe people can and are making meaningful contribution to their homeland. Now, the question of their role in the Senate, I believe, is something we feel is an area and an opportunity for discussion to see how that works. And that's where the discussion continues about whether in terms of voting in the election, because there are some practical issues that are raised by it at the moment, and therefore it will require reform of the entire system. But we're interested in exploring and working with the current reform efforts and other reform efforts to address ways in which people who live in the diaspora, particularly, and mainly we're talking about the US, because Canada and the UK currently qualify as Commonwealth countries, and they therefore just need to have a 6 months, even if they're not Jamaican citizens, have a 6 month residency requirement to be able to vote in an election. So we are interested in addressing that anomaly which exists in the current constitution and looking at ways and means for the diaspora to play a practical role in the parliament, not necessarily the House, but in the Senate as well.
Mr. Hilton, let me just piggyback on Lass's last point. This idea of diaspora members, and they're referring to, as you correctly pointed out, people living particularly in the US. This idea that people living in the US, that it's been considered for them to come and enter representational politics, particularly in the Senate. This is an idea that's been around for more than a decade. In fact, if my memory serves me correctly, back in 2010, I think there was a bipartisan committee that said, yes, they should have a seat in the Senate. And that sentiment has been echoed and carried on from even before 2010 to present. The one thing that I find, and it's kind of misleading, it's misleading, is that we find that when politicians travel to the US and they say this, then get a whole heap of applause. What they haven't said to the people is that this provision in the Constitution is considered an entrenched provision, and therefore it's going to require actually, I think it's a deeply entrenched provision, and it's going to require 2/3 vote in both houses plus a referendum. They haven't said that, and that is going to take time, even though we know that they've made amendments to the Constitution from the time they've been talking about this issue until now. So the idea that, yes, we're thinking about it, we're discussing it, and so on and so forth, that's again, here's my issue with everything that's going on with the Constitutional Reform Committee and everyone involved with it, is that they're talking about the issue, but these are things that should have been done a long time ago. And now they're still talking about it, and we haven't heard anything concrete. So the question I'm going to ask you is this: when does the Constitutional Reform Committee, when does it expire? And I know they have to come up with some reports and get it before a body and before Parliament, and then there has to be like a 3-month period and another 3-month period before the voting, and then you have to do I think the Governor General, the Attorney General, he gets involved, and it has to be a referendum out to the people. So when do you suspect that all of this will be completed?
Well, first of all, the first question you asked is the life of the committee expires when the next election is called, the next parliamentary election is called, whenever that is. And at the moment, the Prime Minister decides those things. So whenever that is, it's not a fixed election date. So the committee's work expires then. My understanding is that the current minister who chairs the committee is working on an agenda to get something in Parliament, certainly before the Parliament, before this parliamentary term. That's what has been said. Now, exactly when that is, I can't give a date certain on it. But let me say this, Ratigan, and again, I hear you and I understand the criticisms and all of that. But I think it is simplistic. I mean, part of it is that we're not educating our people enough, all of us, and we have to take responsibility. And mainly, as a politician, we bear our own portion of that. But education is not solely, and has never been solely, for politicians. So all of us, I mean, and you have seen latterly the opportunity and the need to do so. And as I said, I've commended you on it. But the point is that at the end of it, the system is designed that the changes won't come about unless there's consensus. And we have to say that. So all it takes is for one party, one side to say, no, we don't agree with it. Right? And that has been, if you examine the history, that has been the problem and the thing. We've had disagreement about what should be done and what should not be done here and there. So, and in the real world, that's what happened in the real world. That's why you're faced with the situation you're faced with in your Congress. You're faced with a situation where there are kind of splintered view and thing, because that is how democracy is messy. But it is to my mind still better than some other systems out there. So yes, it is those things those are ideas that have been about. They've even been worked. There's even been report on them. But we're in the absence of a consensus. Nothing gets done in the context of our current constitution.
Well, Mr. Hilton, just a quick follow-up. I've been tracking this issue now for a few years. And I can tell you, and it's in the public domain, that both parties have agreed. As I mentioned to you before, in 2010, there was a bipartisan committee that said, yes, a seat should be reserved for someone in the diaspora. So it's not a matter of consensus. They both agree on it. So again, I put the question to you, why is it that it hasn't been done? Now, we're talking about before, pre-2010, but 2010, I believe, was when both parties came together and said, yes, this should happen. And what we're 13 years beyond that, and it hasn't happened. So it's not, I hear what you're saying, that one party can, if they want to, they can become an impediment to it. But when both parties agree, there should be no impediments. And if there are impediments, why haven't these things been made public then? For example, for the PNP to come out and say, well, you know what? We agree, the JLP agree, but then when we got into some serious discussions, they started putting up stumbling blocks, and then you use that to let people know what's going on.
Yeah, but I mean, and how was that? How was that by itself? Because what has to happen then, thereafter? If all that happens is a reporting or a complaint by the PNP that the JLP not doing this, or the JLP complain that the PNP not doing this. If that's all that happens, if there's not mobilization around that, then nothing happens. So let me give you a concrete example.
No, one quick question. What permit me this, because I'm going to lose it, because I have so many things. When I say lose it, mean I'm going to lose the train of thought. Tell me then, because my reading of it is that there's consensus going back to 2010. So tell me then,
consensus on what? Consensus on what?
Consensus on a seat being provided being created in the Senate for a member of the diaspora. But
hear me now. That's just the beginning. What kind of seat? How do you identify the member of the diaspora?
So that's why I'm asking you. No, that's why I'm moving on to the second phase of the question, which is, can you tell us now then, where is the impediment? Now that we can agree that in 2010 they discussed it and said yes, it should happen, and it hasn't happened. Can you tell us now who's the problem? Point to us specifically and say, well, you know what, this minister said this, or the prime minister said this, and they stopped it from going forward. Can you tell us? Because once you tell us that, I am going to publicize it, and I'm sure my colleagues who are involved in social media, we're going to publicize it to the diaspora and say, listen, the reason why we haven't progressed on this issue is because of Minister X, Minister Y, or the Prime Minister, or this party doing A, B, C, D, E, F, and G.
All right. So here's what I suggest. I am going to, in my next meeting of the Constitutional Reform Committee meeting. I am promising you that when I get there, and I think it's Wednesday of this week. I think it's Wednesday. But when I get there, I'm going to be saying, look, the members of the diaspora with whom I had extensive discussion this past weekend are asking for the committee, because it's a matter we've begun to discuss already in terms of the details of it. We're not talking about the general idea, the details of it. And I believe that the CRC should respond and to say, we'll have this, we'll consider this, and we'll have a report out at a particular time to address this issue specifically.
Okay,
I think
sir.
that's the most useful way to do it, rather
Yeah.
than trying to say which minister said that and which minister said
All right.
that.
No
Right?
problem. But again, can I jump you when you say promise? Because you know what they say about promises, right? I'd like you for you to guarantee me it. You know what I'm saying? I guarantee you that next time when I come back, I'll have an answer for you. Because
Well, I'm
promise thing, you get me nervous with a promise.
No, I'm making a commitment. I'm making a commitment.
Ah, a commitment. Good. All right.
I'm giving a commitment that I'm
Thank you, sir.
going
All right.
there, and I'm going to press on them so that we get to the point where we have this issue at a stage to be presented to the public as to what the positions are.
Thank you in advance, sir.
Currently.
Gentlemen, lawyers are is a different type of creatures, you know. So when you hear them going at it, stay out of the way, you know.
Promises like the zinc fence.
So just stay out of the way. Brethren, it's 2 hours and 16 minutes. Now we'll be going.
One last thing,
And
Michael.
Mr. Hilton, I want to thank you very much.
Michael.
Go ahead. All right, go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Hilton, just to revisit the question that John had asked before, and John is saying, well, what about housing? Now, I realize you cannot give or create a situation where somebody gets a house, especially in a situation where they can't maintain it. We've seen the problem that occurred with the Jimmy Carter's habitat and the other one, Food for the Poor, giving houses to folks. And when the houses get damaged, then they're going to have to depend on the same agencies all over again to revisit. All right. Now, I understand that we're doing basic startup education for kindergartners and for food feeding program, stuff that will reinforce education, early childhood education, and other basic reinforcements needed so that we can move from 40-50% comprehension and reading to something much higher. Well, the question is, in the meantime, there is a population of people who were among the non-reading, the non-graduates who are out of school and who are just circulating in the communities. Same people joining gangs and getting into other difficulties with the law enforcement and creating a problem within their own communities. Surely there must be a plan afoot as to how to simultaneously with the education improvements the Mark made during his speech at the convention, what simultaneously must happen with the other folks who are high in numbers that would enable them to work themselves out of the predicament that they are in, right? Because it was made worse with the COVID period of 2 years, where they couldn't hustle or they couldn't do much to improve themselves. So this is post-COVID. What is the plan for those unemployed people who are out there still and still would like to get their zinc fences to disappear, but you really can't do it. They live in taking one piece of zinc to cover the next one so the water don't come in. The water will run off. What's the plan for all of those people? And they're out there having kids as well.
Well,
And you asked Mr. Hilton this?
Yes.
yeah. Well, this is the current situation. As I said, you're faced with. I can tell you some of the things I'm doing. And really, whether you want to expand that and how you expand it in ways that is not just a pilot kind of thing, but that it is meaningful and substantial. I mean, in Waterhouse, for example, we are embarking on what we call a program that is about to be launched, calling a Gloves for Guns program, where it's something I've been pursuing with introducing boxing in the community as a way to get the attention of a number of our young people with a lot of time on their hands and aggression in many instances. Some of whom just for health reasons that they have to keep fit and practice, and and others who want a career in boxing, because it's all of us here on this program know that Waterhouse has a tradition of producing boxers. Mike McCollum is one of our celebrated boxers, but there are others who are not as famous as Mike. So we believe that has an attraction. The youngsters have said it does, and they are interested in those kinds of programs. So this Thursday past, we brought the president of the boxing board, Jamaica Boxing Board, into the community, looking at what we propose to be the center of what we're trying to do in the community. Thankfully, he came, he looked, he supported the vision that we have and believe it is workable and has come on board in doing that. So in short order, we will be absorbing some of that. The music thing, this music studio I talked about, is another way of doing that. There are other training programs involved, welding. There are people who are not book bright but are skilled with their hands and are dexterous with their hands. And we have to find those programs and make it not just one-off, but systematic, that can begin to address and absorb some of those concerns. And this is why I'm saying the debt reduction strategy by itself can't work, because while you're busy reducing the debt beyond what the agreed rate of reduction has been, and which is a sensible and safe way to reduce debt, you're speeding that up to the exclusion of meaningful programs such as this. The other factor is that in the supplemental budget that was just tabled last week in the House, and which is to be debated, we found out that $9 billion that was allocated in the last budget is now being sent back to the consolidated fund because there's no program to take up those $9 billion. Now the obvious question is why? Why not? How come? How come with all of the challenges that we're faced with, whether it be infrastructure, road, all these things in the communities, you are sending back $9 billion to the consolidated fund, and hopefully, and if you're not careful, some of that go to our paying down debt further. So I'm just saying the priorities are wrong, and we're faced with some immediate and existential issues that we have to pay focused attention to. And I'm saying it is going to be a hand-to-hand combat dealing with the situation at a community level and identifying what are the practical needs and mobilizing the resources around them, the programs and the resources and the management of them, because there have to be proper governance in that process.
On that note, Gentlemen, we start out with the question: PNP same song or new direction? I don't think we can make a distinction between the PNP and the GLP just now. I don't think we are clear on that. We know that there's some disagreement around fiscal policy, but I'm
You
not
have
sure
you've
what
heard nothing about the new direction.
the new direction.
You've heard nothing on that.
Exactly. So
Well, what does that tell me? My reaction is, well, it depends on who's the listener and what your reaction is, you know?
that's
And
true.
yes,
We all have our angle on it, I heard some, but when I say new direction, I think we're talking about some fundamental change, not the dress up and makeup thing. That's just my view.
but put them on the
Regardless of
table.
that,
Put them on the table so that we can address them as well. Put them on the table.
yes, yes, I will.
All right,
I will.
cool.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you all. Thank you all. We're still going to explore this topic because most of us, we are progressive. In one form or the not that we want to take down the PNP or what have you. We are looking forward, we're longing for the days when the PNP was more active and aggressive, and we're not seeing that. So, what good until such time we meet again next Sunday, 4 o'clock, same place. And Mr. Hilton, there's always an open invitation for you.
You know I'm
All
willing
right,
to come on.
all right,
Willing to come
brother.
on. Willing to come on anytime. All right.
Yes, man.
Appreciate
Yeah.
that. Appreciate
Him
that.
used,
Now we need to
him
talk
used,
about the recording studio.
him used to licks, man. Mr. Hilton used to licks. He can't be a politician and afraid of licks.
Come with the game, John. Come with the game.
I don't mind giving some licks myself, but I
That's
don't run.
right. That's right.
Yeah, I don't run from taking licks.
Remember, White House representing us, so just be careful, It's White House represent. You understand? All right, we're ready.
Next time we go Jamaica, well,
Yeah,
you come with me. Make we get some. We walk around all them community and take picture.
All right, sir.
Yeah, I think the central question this week was really the zinc fence.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right.
I need to get that thing behind you, Ratigan. I need a picture.
Yeah.
All you have to do,
That's
Mr. Hilton, is just show up with a change to the picture in the background where Ratty is.
Yeah.
And then show it as something else.
Well,
Perfect white painted picket fences with a new look. And then there's no argument that